Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to establish a ground rule for all my colleagues, and that is, regardless of how you vote on this resolution, no one will question your patriotism. If we can just start with that benchmark, I think we'll have a higher degree of debate and in good faith. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is about duty and responsibility. The duty and responsibility that Congress owes to our men and women in uniform. Our first duty is to make wise and educated choices in identifying a threat, the necessity of action, and the legitimacy of the goal before committing or continuing to commit more of our troops to the war. When considering this resolution, which reflects that an escalation of the war is unwarranted and it's not in the best interest of our nation and our troops, each of us must ask one fundamental question: is escalating and continuing the war in Iraq worth fighting and dying for? Because that, in the final analysis, is what we decide. We seek an answer to this question, but we must be ever mindful that the courage and bravery of our troops is never questioned. Our soldiers' valor and commitment are not diminished by the errors in judgment made by their civilian leaders. The question is whether the mission in Iraq is worth their sacrifice. As we move forward with this decision, we must recognize the lessons of history, or we are doomed to repeat its grave mistakes. For example, quote, "The public has been led into a trap from which it will be hard to escape with dignity and honor. They have been tricked into it by a steady withholding of information. The Baghdad communiques are belated, insincere, and incomplete. Things have been far worse than we have been told. Our administration more bloody and inefficient than the public knows. We are today not far from a disaster." Now the parallels are uncanny, and you're wondering who may have said that. The quote was 86 years ago, and it was a communication from T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, in August of 1920 from Baghdad. Continuing, the situation in Iraq is grave and deteriorating. In addition, there is significant underreporting of violence in Iraq. The standard for recording attacks acts as a filter to keep events out of reports and databases. More Lawrence of Arabia, more 1920, no, 2006, the Iraq Study Group report. Let me continue. 1992, General Colin Powell, quote, "The Gulf War was a limited objective war. If it had not been, we would be ruling Baghdad today at unpardonable expense in terms of money, lives lost, and regional relationships." Now, a year earlier, there was an observation, quote, "Once you got Baghdad, it's not clear what you do with it. It's not clear what kind of government you would put in place of the one that is there now, Saddam Hussein. Is it going to be a Shia regime, a Sunni regime, or a Kurdish regime? Or one that tilts towards the Baathists, or one that tilts towards the Islamic fundamentalists? How much credibility is that government going to have if it is set up by the United States military when it's there? How long does the United States military have to stay to protect the people that sign on for that government? And what happens to it once you leave?" End quote. That was 1991, spoken by then Secretary of Defense and current Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney. We remain a good and great nation, but we have done all the good in Iraq that we are going to do. An escalation only delays the day that the Iraqis assume the responsibility of settling and setting aside their sectarian differences and embrace the promise of democracy that we have delivered to them. We cannot do this for them, whether we send in 20,000 or 200,000 more troops. And we cannot ignore the lessons of history, the views of military experts, and the will of the American people. It is time for our troops to start coming home. And it's time for the Iraqis to start building a home. Vote yes on this resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.